I'm Faith, 30 years old, and on my last birthday, my father handed me an envelope that would shatter everything I believed about my family. He stood in my doorway, the first time he'd visited my apartment in 3 years, and said words I'll carry to my grave. Your grandmother left this for you. She died believing you'd amount to nothing. But inside that envelope was a letter, and the first line read, If you're reading this, you survived your parents. I knew you would. What I found next, a key, a secret, and documents hidden for 5 years, changed everything I thought I knew about my grandmother, my father, and the inheritance I was told I didn't deserve. Before I tell you what happened, if you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let me take you back to 5 years ago, to my grandmother's funeral, where this story really begins. The funeral home smelled like lilies and money. My grandmother, Eleanor Mercer, lay in a mahogany casket that probably cost more than my car. White flowers cascaded around her like she was sleeping in a garden, and somewhere behind the mourners, a string quartet played something soft and forgettable. My father, Richard Mercer, stood at the center of the room, not grieving, receiving. He shook hands with business partners, accepted condolences with practiced solemnity, his Rolex catching the chandelier light every time he reached out to clasp someone's shoulder. Thank you for coming. Mother would have appreciated it. I watched from the corner, invisible. My stepmother Victoria floated through the crowd in a black Chanel dress, playing the role of dutiful daughter-in-law. She guided my half-brother Derek, then 19, home from his freshman year at an Ivy League school, to stand beside our father. This is Derek, she told everyone who would listen. Eleanor's beloved grandson. She adored him. No one introduced me. I was 25 then, already teaching 3rd grade at a public school in a low-income neighborhood, already the family disappointment, already the daughter who chose a job instead of a career. But here's what I kept thinking about, standing alone by the flower arrangements. My grandmother used to call me her little star. She taught me to read before kindergarten. She let me stay with her for 2 years after my mother died, and those were the happiest years of my childhood. She wrote me letters, actual handwritten letters, even after I grew up. She always had stationery in her desk drawer, cream-colored paper with her initials embossed at the top. I didn't know then that those letters would matter, that she'd been preparing something for years. I only knew that she was gone, and no one in my family seemed to notice I was grieving too. To understand what came next, you need to understand where I came from. My mother, Linda, died of breast cancer when I was 12. I remember the hospital room, the machines beeping, her hand going cold in mine. I remember my father standing by the window, staring out at nothing, like he'd already left. He didn't know how to be a single parent, or maybe he didn't want to know. 2 weeks after the funeral, he drove me to my grandmother's house in Vermont, a beautiful old colonial with a wraparound porch and a garden full of roses, and said he needed time to process. That time lasted 2 years. Those 2 years with Grandma Eleanor were everything. She made me pancakes shaped like stars. She read me Anne of Green Gables out loud, doing all the voices. She told me stories about my mother as a little girl, stories my father never shared because talking about Mom made him uncomfortable. Your mother was brave, Grandma told me once, tucking me into bed in the room that had been Mom's. And you're brave too, Faith. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. When I was 14, my father remarried. Victoria was elegant, polished, and 10 years younger than him. She wanted me home, she said, wanted to be a real family. So I moved back into my father's new house, a 5-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. My room was the smallest one, tucked next to the garage, far from the master suite. A year later, Derek was born. And just like that, I became invisible. I didn't realize it then, but those 2 years with my grandmother weren't just happy memories. She was already planning something, already worried about what her son might become. By the time I graduated college with a degree in elementary education, my father had stopped pretending to be interested in my life. He didn't come to my graduation. Client meeting, he said. You understand. I understood perfectly. Derek, meanwhile, got a party when he was accepted to university. 50 guests, catered. My father gave a toast about the future of the Mercer name. I sat at the back table nursing a glass of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and watched my family celebrate the son who mattered. Every holiday, every family gathering, the same pattern. My father would corner me at some point and ask, "Still teaching?" "Yes, Dad." "What's the salary for that nowadays, 30,000? 42. He'd laugh. Not cruelly, just dismissively, like I'd told a mildly amusing joke. I give Derek that much for his allowance. He wasn't exaggerating. Derek drove a BMW that our father bought him. I drove a 2012 Honda Civic I'd purchased second-hand with my own savings. "Daughters," my father once said to a business partner at Thanksgiving, loud enough for me to hear. "They don't understand ambition. It's biological. Women think small. Family, feelings, that sort of thing. Nothing wrong with it. Just don't expect them to build anything." Victoria would nod along, patting my hand sympathetically. "Faith is nurturing," she'd say, like it was a consolation prize. That's her gift. My gift. Teaching children to read, staying late to help struggling students, making $42,000 a year while my father bought boats. I never argued, never defended myself. I'd learned early that arguing with Richard Mercer only made things worse. So I stayed quiet. I stayed small. And I believed, for a very long time, that my grandmother had been disappointed in me too. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered for the reading of my grandmother's will. The law office was downtown, all dark wood and leather chairs. My father sat at the head of the table like he owned the place. Victoria was on his right, Derek on his left. I sat at the far end, near the door. The attorney, not someone I recognized, a younger man who kept glancing at my father nervously, cleared his throat and began reading. I don't remember most of it. Legal language, property descriptions, charitable donations. What I remember is this. To my son, Richard Mercer, I leave 90% of my estate, to be managed and distributed among family members at his discretion. My father nodded, unsurprised. To my granddaughter, Faith Mercer, I leave the sum of $10,000 to be used toward the purchase of a reliable vehicle. $10,000. Enough for a used car. That was it. Victoria reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's sweet," she whispered. "She wanted you to be safe on the road." I nodded, unable to speak. Derek didn't even look at me. He was already asking our father about investment strategies for his portion. And my father smiled. Not a happy smile, a satisfied one. "Mother always knew what people deserved," he said. I signed where they told me to sign. I shook hands with the attorney. I walked out of that office believing that my grandmother, the woman who called me her little star, had looked at my life and found it wanting. But something nagged at me. The attorney, he'd hesitated before reading certain sections. His eyes had flickered to my father, then away. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. 5 years passed. I kept teaching. I moved into a studio apartment, 400 square feet of independence that I could actually afford. I stopped going to most family gatherings. Nobody seemed to notice. Then came my 30th birthday. I'd bought myself a small cake from the bakery down the street. Chocolate with raspberry filling, my favorite. I was sitting alone at my tiny kitchen table, a single candle lit, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my father was standing there. First time he'd visited in 3 years. He was wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my rent, and he was holding a yellowed envelope. "Found this in Mother's things," he said, not bothering with hello. "Must have gotten mixed in with some old papers. Figured you'd want it." He held it out. I took it. "Don't get your hopes up," he added, already turning to leave. "She wrote it before she died, probably some sentimental nonsense." He paused at the top of my stairs. "She died believing you'd amount to nothing, you know. Told me herself. Said she worried about you." Then he was gone. I stood in my doorway, holding the envelope, my birthday cake melting behind me. The paper was old, slightly brittle, my grandmother's handwriting on the front. For Faith, to be delivered on her 30th birthday. My father hadn't opened it. The seal was still intact, that old-fashioned wax seal my grandmother used, with her initials pressed into it. Slowly, I walked back inside, sat down at my table, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, folded around a small brass key. The letter began, "My dearest Faith, if you're reading this, it means you survived your parents. I knew you would." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. I read the words again. "If you're reading this, it means you survived your parents. Not your father, parents, plural. Like my grandmother knew exactly what kind of household I'd grown up in." I kept reading. "My sweet girl, I need you to understand something. I have never, not for one single day, believed you were anything less than extraordinary. If your father told you otherwise, he was lying. He lies about many things. It's a habit he learned from his father, and one I failed to break." Tears were streaming down my face now. 5 years of believing she'd given up on me. 5 years of carrying that shame. The key enclosed opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank, downtown branch. Box number 1247. "I have named you as the sole authorized person. Not your father, not his wife, not his son. Only you. Inside that box, you will find everything they tried to hide from you. Documents, proof, your inheritance, the real one, not the scraps Richard wanted you to have." I set the letter down, picked it up again. "Read that paragraph 3 more times. Your inheritance, the real one." "I didn't leave these things with my regular attorney," the letter continued. "Richard would have found them. I left them where only you could reach them, when you were old enough to know what to do. There is also a card in the box for Margaret Holloway. She's an old friend, and she knows everything. Call her if you need help. Remember, my star, you are not what they made you believe. You never were. All my love, always, Grandma Eleanor." The key was cold in my palm. Brass, with the number 1247 engraved on it. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I called in sick to work, the first time in 3 years, and drove downtown. First National Bank was one of those old stone buildings that looked like it had been guarding people's secrets since the Civil War. Marble floors, brass fixtures, the kind of hushed atmosphere where everyone speaks in whispers. I approached the front desk with my driver's license and the key. "I need to access safe deposit box 1247. The clerk, young, professional, slightly bored, typed something into her computer, then stopped, typed again. Her eyebrows rose. "One moment, please, ma'am. I need to get my manager." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Thomas Caldwell, the branch manager. He was in his mid-40s, graying at the temples, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Mercer," he said, studying his screen. "This box was opened by Eleanor Mercer in 2019, and you were added as the sole authorized accessor at that time. No one else," he emphasized those words carefully, "has permission to open it. Several inquiries have been made over the years, but we've followed Mrs. Mercer's instructions precisely." "Inquiries?" I asked. "From whom?" He hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to say, but your grandmother was very specific. She told me personally, 'If anyone else asks, including my son, tell them there's nothing here.' And I have." He leaned forward slightly. "She also told me something else, Miss Mercer. She said, 'When my granddaughter comes, and she will come, tell her I never stopped believing in her. Not for one day.'" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely. Thomas Caldwell stood. "Let me take you to the vault." He led me through a heavy steel door, down a corridor lined with hundreds of small metal boxes, to number 1247. "Take all the time you need," he said, and left me alone. The box was larger than I expected. Inside was a thick manila folder, a smaller envelope, and a leather portfolio embossed with a law firm's name I didn't recognize. I started with the folder. The first document made me sit down hard on the vault room's small bench. Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Grace Mercer. Executed, March 15, 2019. 2019, 2 years before she died. After the will I'd heard read in that attorney's office. I scanned the pages, legal language swimming before my eyes until I found the key paragraphs. "To my granddaughter, Faith Eleanor Mercer, I bequeath the following. My education trust fund, currently valued at approximately $1.8 million, to be used for her personal enrichment and security, and my property located at 847 Mountain View Road, Stowe, Vermont, currently valued at approximately $1 million, which she may inhabit, sell, or manage at her sole discretion. $2.8 million. The property in Vermont. The house where I'd spent the happiest 2 years of my childhood. I kept reading. To my son, Richard Mercer, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my sincere hope that he will one day understand that family is not a business to be managed, but a garden to be tended. 50,000, not 90%. $50,000. The will was signed, witnessed, and notarized. Official, legal, real. There was more in the folder. Bank statements showing the trust fund balance. The deed to the Vermont property, still in my grandmother's name, never sold as my father had claimed, and transfer records showing that someone had been withdrawing money from the trust. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Starting exactly when Derek enrolled at Wharton. I laid out the bank statements on the vault room bench like evidence at a crime scene. The pattern was unmistakable. September 2022, $85,000 withdrawn. Derek's first year at Wharton, September 2023, $82,000 withdrawn. Second year, May 2024, $150,000 withdrawn, noted as business investment. Mercer Properties, LLC. Total, $317,000 from my trust fund, money my grandmother left specifically for me. And that wasn't counting the Vermont house, which my father had told everyone was sold to cover estate taxes. The deed in my hands said otherwise. The property was still there, still titled to Eleanor Mercer, still mine. I sat in that vault room for almost an hour, reading and rereading. My hands had stopped shaking. Something else had replaced the shock, something cold and clear. Derek's MBA, his prestigious degree, his networking events, his future CEO trajectory. All of it paid for with my inheritance. My father's expansion of his real estate business, funded by money that was supposed to be my security, and they'd done it while telling me my grandmother was disappointed in me, while making me believe I deserved nothing. At the bottom of the folder, I found a handwritten note from my grandmother. Faith, I know what you're feeling right now, betrayed, furious, perhaps even broken. But you're not broken, my star. You never were. I didn't leave you defenseless. Read everything, call Margaret, and remember, the truth has a way of finding the light. Sometimes it just needs a little help. I packed everything back into the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked out of that vault. The Faith who went in was a woman who believed she'd been forgotten. The Faith who came out knew she'd been robbed, and she was going to get it all back. Margaret Holloway answered on the second ring. Miss Mercer? Not a question. Like she'd been waiting for this call for years. Your grandmother told me you'd reach out eventually. I just wasn't sure when. Margaret's office was in a converted brownstone on a tree-lined street, the kind of place that whispered old money and discretion. She met me at the door herself, a silver-haired woman in her early 70s with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. I was Eleanor's attorney for her real estate planning, she explained, leading me to a sitting room with tea already waiting. Not the family attorney, Richard controlled that relationship. I was her friend first, her legal counsel second. She poured tea with steady hands. I witnessed the 2019 will. I notarized it. I have copies of everything you found in that box, plus email confirmations from the notary public and both witnesses. She met my eyes. Your father submitted the 2015 will to probate court, the one that predates the 2019 version. In legal terms, that's called fraud. The word hung in the air. Fraud. What are my options? I asked. Margaret set down her teacup. Option 1, we go to the authorities, file charges. Your father could face felony charges for executor fraud and potentially theft. There would be an investigation, a trial, media coverage. She paused. Option 2, we confront him directly, with evidence, and negotiate a settlement. Full transfer of the trust fund and property, plus restitution for what was taken. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges. Would he agree to that? Margaret's smile was thin. Richard Mercer would agree to almost anything to avoid public humiliation. The question is, Faith. She leaned forward. Do you want this handled quietly? Or do you want him to face consequences where it hurts most? I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to watch my father get led away in handcuffs, wanted the world to see who he really was, wanted Derek to understand that his shiny MBA came with a price tag paid in his sister's stolen inheritance. But another part of me, the part shaped by my grandmother's letters, her patience, her quiet strength, wanted something different. I don't want to destroy him, I finally said. I just want what's mine. And I want him to admit it, really admit it, in front of people who matter to him. Margaret nodded slowly. A public acknowledgement without public prosecution. Difficult to engineer. What if there was already a public event, I said. Something where his reputation is on display, where the right people are watching. That's when I remembered the invitation. It had arrived last week, embossed gold on cream cardstock. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 65th birthday of Richard Mercer. The party was in 3 weeks, at the country club where my father played golf with judges and businessmen. 80 guests. The social event of the season for his circle. Victoria had called afterward to remind me to dress appropriately. Don't embarrass us, Faith. You know how your father's friends can be. I told Margaret about the party. Her eyes lit up with something that might have been admiration or anticipation. So, she said, you want to give your father a birthday present he'll never forget? I want to give him exactly what he deserves, in front of the people whose opinions he actually cares about. Margaret reached for her calendar. 3 weeks, she said. We have work to do. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter like a dare. Celebrating 65 years of Richard Mercer, gold embossed, formal script, the kind of stationery that cost more per sheet than some people spend on dinner. Victoria called 3 days before the event. Faith? Her voice dripped with false warmth. Just checking? You received the invitation? I did. Wonderful. Now, about your outfit. Your father's colleagues will be there. The Hendersons, the Clarks, Judge Morrison. These people notice things. I understand. Wear something appropriate, something that fits. A pause. And Faith? Don't stand in the corner like you did at your grandmother's funeral. It looks odd. Mingle, smile, act like part of the family. I counted to 3 before responding. I'll do my best to represent the family well, Victoria. That's all we ask. She hung up. I looked at the dress I'd already chosen, hanging in my closet. Navy blue, simple but elegant. My grandmother's pearl earrings to go with it, the only jewelry she'd left me outright, placed in the safe deposit box instead of listed in any will. And in my bag, a folder. Certified copies of every document I'd found. The 2019 will, the bank statements, the deed, the notary's confirmation. Margaret would be there too. Not as my guest, as someone who had so many fond memories of Eleanor and had heard about the celebration through mutual friends. Perfectly innocent, completely deniable. My father wanted a birthday party. He was going to get one, and for the first time in 30 years, I was going to speak up at a family gathering. The difference was, this time, I had the receipts. I need to pause here for a moment, because this is the part where everything changed, where I stopped being the daughter who accepted whatever scraps my family threw at me and started being someone else entirely. Have you ever stood at a crossroads like that? Knowing that whatever you choose, there's no going back? If you're still with me, if this story resonates with something in your own life, I'd love for you to hit that like button, not for me. For everyone else out there who needs to know they're not alone. Now, let me tell you about the week before the party. 1 week before the party, my father summoned me. That's the only word for it. Summoned. A text message that read, "Come to the house. 7 p.m. Family meeting." I drove to the house I'd grown up in, the 5-bedroom colonial that had never felt like home. Victoria answered the door and led me to my father's study without a word. He was waiting behind his mahogany desk, leather chair throne-like behind him. Derek sat on a side chair, looking uncomfortable. Victoria positioned herself near the window, watching. "Sit," my father said. I sat. "I've heard something disturbing." His voice was ice. "Someone at First National mentioned you came in asking about mother's affairs, asking about safe deposit boxes. I kept my face neutral. I was curious. Curious, he leaned forward. Let me be clear, Faith. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you found, you're wrong. Mother's estate was settled 5 years ago. Legally, properly, end of discussion. Dad, Derek started. Quiet. Richard's eyes never left mine. If you start digging into settled matters, making accusations, causing problems, he smiled, but there was no warmth in it. People will think you've lost your mind. The grieving granddaughter, desperate for attention. Mental illness runs in families, you know. Your mother had her struggles. I felt the words like a slap. My mother's depression, weaponized. I would hate, my father continued, for your colleagues at that little school to hear that you've become unstable. It would be such a shame for your career. I stood up slowly. Thank you for your concern, Dad. I'll see you at your birthday party. I walked out without looking back. In my car, I let myself shake for exactly 1 minute. Then I drove home, pulled out my phone, and texted Margaret. He's scared. That means we're right. The next morning, Victoria called. Faith, honey, her voice was syrupy with fake concern. Your father was harsh last night. He's just protective of the family. You understand. I understand. Good, because we all want what's best. Your grandmother's memory, the family reputation. It's important to keep these things private. A pause. You're coming to the party, aren't you? It would look so strange if you didn't. People would talk. I'll be there. Perfect. She sounded relieved. And Faith, maybe we could have lunch afterward. Just us girls. I feel like we've grown apart. I almost laughed. Grown apart, like we'd ever been close. That sounds nice, Victoria. Wonderful. See you Saturday. She hung up, mission accomplished. The difficult daughter had been pacified. The family machine could roll on undisturbed. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd recorded every word of that family meeting. My phone had been in my pocket, voice memo running, from the moment I walked in. 30 minutes of my father threatening my career, invoking my mother's mental health, essentially admitting there was something worth hiding. I sent the file to Margaret that evening. Beautiful, she wrote back. Not admissible in court without consent, but excellent insurance. If he tries anything after Saturday, we have options. I sat alone in my apartment, looking at my grandmother's letter one more time. You're not broken, my star. You never were. I hadn't felt like a star in decades. I'd felt like a burden, a disappointment, an afterthought. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that's what they needed me to believe. Saturday was 3 days away, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to shine. The night before the party, I almost backed out. I sat at my kitchen table at 11 p.m., grandmother's letter in front of me, and every doubt I'd ever had came flooding back. What if I was wrong? What if the documents were somehow invalid, outdated, superseded, legally meaningless? What if my father was right, and I was just a desperate, delusional woman grasping at conspiracies to explain why her life hadn't turned out the way she wanted? What if my grandmother had written that letter during a moment of confusion, and the real will, the one that left me nothing, was actually what she intended? I picked up my phone and dialed Margaret. It was 11:47 p.m. She answered on the third ring, voice alert. Faith, what's wrong? What if I'm wrong? The words tumbled out. What if this is all a mistake and I humiliate myself in front of 80 people and my father is right about everything? Silence. Then, Faith, I need to tell you something. Eleanor called me 3 days before she died. She was in hospice. She knew the end was close. I couldn't breathe. She said, Margaret, my son is going to try to take everything from Faith. He's been planning it for years. Promise me you'll help her when the time comes. And I promised. Why didn't you contact me sooner? Because Eleanor asked me not to. She said you needed to find your own strength first. You needed to be ready. Margaret's voice softened. You're ready now, Faith. I've seen the documents. I witnessed that will myself. You're not delusional. You're not wrong. Your grandmother believed in you until her very last breath. I was crying. Not sad tears, release tears. The kind that come when something heavy finally lifts. I'll see you tomorrow, I said. Yes, Margaret replied. You will. The morning of my father's birthday, I arrived at Margaret's office at 9 a.m. She had everything laid out on her conference table. Certified copies of the 2019 will, the bank statements, the property deed, notarized affidavits from the witnesses, email confirmation from the notary public. Here's the strategy, she said, straightening her reading glasses. We wait for the toast. Your father will give a speech, he always does, and he'll almost certainly mention your grandmother. When he finishes, you ask to say a few words. He won't let me. He won't have a choice, not in front of Judge Morrison and half of his business network. Refusing to let his own daughter speak at his birthday party would look petty. She smiled thinly. Richard cares about appearances above all else. Use that. We practiced. What I would say, how I would say it, when to present the documents. Don't raise your voice, Margaret coached. Don't cry. Don't accuse present. Let the papers speak. Let the numbers tell the story. At noon, she handed me a slim leather folder. Everything you need. And Faith, she gripped my shoulder. If Richard tries to have you removed, I'll be there. The notary will be there. I invited her as my +1. The witnesses to your grandmother's will, both attending. You're not alone. I stared at her. How did you manage that? Your grandmother had friends, Faith. Real friends. People who knew what Richard was capable of and were waiting for the day someone finally called him on it. Her eyes were fierce. Eleanor planned this. All of it. She just needed you to be brave enough to see it through. I tucked the folder into my bag. I was ready. The Westbrook Country Club looked like something out of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white-clothed tables. A jazz quartet played softly near the bar. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the golf course stretched green and perfect into the evening mist. 80 guests milled about with champagne flutes, their designer clothes and easy laughter marking them as people who'd never worried about a bill in their lives. My father stood at the center of it all, accepting birthday wishes like a king receiving tribute. His Hermes tie was perfectly knotted. His smile was perfectly calibrated. Every inch the successful self-made man. Built everything from nothing, I heard him tell a cluster of admirers. No handouts, no help, just hard work and vision. I found a spot near the edge of the room. Margaret had already arrived, seated at a table with 2 women I didn't recognize. The witnesses to my grandmother's will, I realized. The notary was there too, a small woman in her 60s with a calm, observant face. Derek spotted me and waved half-heartedly. Victoria glided over, Chanel suit immaculate, Cartier bracelet glinting. Faith, you came. Her tone suggested she'd half-hoped I wouldn't. You look nice. Thank you, Victoria. Your father's about to give his toast. Try to look supportive. She swept away. I watched my father take the microphone from the band leader, tapping it twice to get everyone's attention. The room quieted. 65 years, he began, voice warm with practiced charm. 65 years of building, growing, and, yes, making a few mistakes along the way. Polite laughter. My hand drifted to the folder in my bag. Let him finish, Margaret had said. Let him say what he wants to say. It will make the contrast that much sharper. So I waited. My father held the room like a conductor holding an orchestra. When I was young, I had nothing, he continued, champagne flute raised. My father worked himself to the bone just to keep food on the table. I learned early that if you want something in this world, you have to take it. Nobody hands you anything. Victoria nodded admiringly from her seat. Derek beamed. But I also had my mother. His voice softened. Eleanor Mercer, the strongest woman I ever knew. She taught me discipline. She taught me that family is everything, that our legacy is what we build and who we build it for. I felt my jaw tighten. Mother passed 5 years ago, but her spirit lives on in this family, in the values she instilled, in the future she helped me create. He turned to look at Derek, and especially in my son Derek, the next generation of Mercers. Mother always said she couldn't wait to see what he'd accomplish. The room applauded. Derek ducked his head modestly. Her legacy, her values, her spirit. My father raised his glass higher. So tonight, I want to thank everyone who's been part of this journey. My beautiful wife Victoria, who's supported me through everything. My son Derek, who makes me proud every single day. And a pause, a glance in my direction. My daughter Faith, who's found her own quiet path in life. More applause. A few people looked at me with vague, sympathetic smiles. Quiet path. Even at his birthday toast, he couldn't resist the dig. To 65 years, he concluded, and to the legacy of Eleanor Mercer, carried forward by those who truly understood her. The room drank. I stood. "Dad," I called out, my voice steady. "May I say a few words about Grandma?" 80 faces turned toward me. My father's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. He couldn't refuse. Not here. Not with Judge Morrison watching, with business partners lifting curious eyebrows, with Victoria's carefully managed social circle waiting to see what the quiet daughter had to say. "Of course, Faith." He gestured toward the microphone like he was doing me a favor. "Family should always speak at these occasions." I walked to the front of the room on legs that felt surprisingly steady. I took the microphone. 80 faces watched me. Curious, bored, mildly interested. My father stood to the side, champagne still in hand, already preparing to cut me off if I took too long. "Thank you, Dad," I smiled. "And happy birthday." Polite applause. My grandmother, Eleanor Mercer, was the most important person in my life. I let that sink in. She raised me for 2 years after my mother died. She taught me to read, to cook, to love stories. She called me her little star. I opened my bag. She also taught me to keep careful records. Something shifted in the room. My father's smile flickered. "I recently came into possession of some documents my grandmother left specifically for me." I pulled out the folder, including her last will and testament, executed on March 15, 2019. Notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. Complete silence. According to this will, I was meant to inherit approximately $2.8 million, a trust fund, and a property in Vermont, not the $10,000 I actually received. Someone gasped. My father stepped forward. "Faith, this isn't the time." The will submitted to probate court was dated 2015. I kept my voice calm, professional, exactly as Margaret had coached. 4 years older than this one. Would you like to explain that, Dad? To all these people who know what document fraud means?" The room erupted in murmurs. Richard Mercer's face had gone from controlled to ashen in about 3 seconds. Victoria was gripping her champagne flute so hard I thought it might shatter. Derek just looked confused, like someone had switched the channel on his life without warning. "Faith," my father's voice was tight. "You're clearly upset. This isn't the place to discuss family matters." "I think it's exactly the place." I pulled out the bank statements. These show that over $300,000 was withdrawn from my trust fund in the past 3 years. The timing corresponds exactly to Derek's tuition at Wharton. More gasps. A woman I didn't recognize set down her champagne and pulled out her phone. Derek stood up. "That's insane. My tuition was paid by the family, by Dad, by my inheritance." I kept my eyes on my father. "The inheritance you told me I didn't deserve. The inheritance you said Grandma wanted you to manage because she was disappointed in me." "She was disappointed," my father's composure finally cracked. "She was a confused old woman at the end. She didn't know what she was signing." "Richard," a woman's voice, calm and authoritative. Margaret Holloway stood up from her table in the back. "I was Eleanor's attorney. I witnessed that will. She was in full command of her faculties. Would you like me to testify to that under oath?" Every head in the room swiveled between Margaret and Richard. "Who the hell invited you?" my father snarled. "Your mother was my friend for 50 years. Margaret walked forward slowly. She knew exactly what you would do, and she made sure there was someone who would remember the truth. I held up the will. "This is certified, Dad. The notary who signed it is in this room. So are both witnesses. Would you like to keep lying?" Margaret reached my side, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "For those who don't know me," she said, addressing the crowd with the ease of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms, "my name is Margaret Holloway. I'm a retired estate attorney, and Eleanor Mercer was one of my dearest friends." My father looked like he wanted to bolt, but he was trapped, surrounded by colleagues, clients, everyone whose good opinion he'd spent decades cultivating. "Eleanor called me 3 days before she passed." Margaret's voice was steady. "From hospice. She was tired and in pain, but her mind was sharp. She said, 'Margaret, my son is going to try to steal Faith's inheritance. I've left proof. Make sure it's found.' Victoria made a strangled sound. Derek had gone completely white. Eleanor also left a provision, Margaret continued. If Richard violated his duties as executor, which he did, by submitting a superseded will and making unauthorized withdrawals, his executor status would be automatically revoked. Faith becomes the rightful administrator of the estate. That's not legally, my father started. It is. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the noise. He'd risen from his table, face grim. Richard, if what these women are saying is accurate, you're looking at executor fraud. That's a felony. The room exploded in whispers. I stood there, holding documents that proved everything, watching my father's world collapse in slow motion. I didn't come here to have you arrested, Dad. My voice was quiet, but it carried. I came here to get what's mine. Transfer the trust fund. Transfer the deed. Pay back what you took. And we can settle this without prosecutors. And if he refuses? Someone asked. Margaret smiled without warmth. Then we file Monday morning. Your choice, Richard. I've never seen my father look small before. He'd always loomed large in my mind. The powerful patriarch, the successful businessman, the man whose approval I could never quite earn. But standing there in his Hermes tie and his Rolex, surrounded by people who were looking at him with new eyes, he seemed to shrink. This is entrapment, he hissed. You planned this. I planned nothing. I kept my voice level. You delivered the envelope yourself, Dad, on my birthday. You told me Grandma died disappointed in me. I let that sink in. She wasn't disappointed. She was worried about what you would do. Richard, Victoria grabbed his arm. We need to leave. We need to call our lawyer. The party's over, someone muttered, already heading for the exit. My father lunged toward me, not physically, but with words, the only weapon he had left. You ungrateful, worthless, after everything I did for you. Everything you did for me. I stood my ground. You ignored me for 30 years. You stole my inheritance. You told me my grandmother died ashamed of who I was. I paused. You had 5 years to do the right thing. 5 years. You chose this. His face twisted. You'll regret this. No. I handed the folder to Margaret. You had choices. Every step of the way, you had choices. You chose to lie. You chose to steal. You chose to make me believe I was worthless. I took a breath. Those were your choices, Dad, not mine. The room had mostly emptied now. A few people lingered, Judge Morrison, the notary, the witnesses, people who would remember what happened here. My father stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe he'd never seen me at all. People asked me what it felt like after. Was it victory? Revenge? Satisfaction? Honestly, it was exhaustion. The kind that comes after you've been holding your breath for years and finally let it out. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like sleeping for a week. If you're still watching, if any part of this story has made you think about your own family, your own boundaries, the things you've accepted that maybe you shouldn't have, I want you to know you're not alone, and your story isn't over. A like or a share means more than you know. Now let me tell you what happened next. The fallout was swift. Within 2 weeks of that birthday party, my father was facing an official investigation for executor fraud. His attorney, a different one from the man who'd read the fake will 5 years ago, reached out to Margaret with an offer. Richard would transfer the remaining trust fund balance, approximately $1.5 million, to me immediately. He would sign over the deed to the Vermont property. He would pay restitution of $350,000 to cover what he'd already withdrawn, plus interest, and he would formally relinquish his executor status. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges. Some people thought I let him off easy. Maybe I did. But watching my father go to prison wasn't going to bring back the years I'd spent believing my grandmother hated me. It wasn't going to undo the damage to my self-worth. And honestly, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted what was mine. The consequences rippled outward anyway. Derek had to take out loans to finish his final semester at Wharton. My father couldn't help. The settlement had drained his accounts, and his reputation was in tatters. 3 business partners pulled out of deals with Mercer Properties within a month. If he cheats his own daughter, I heard one of them tell another. Who else is he cheating? Victoria filed for divorce 4 months later. I heard she took half of everything he had left. And me? I got a certified check. I got the keys to a house in Vermont. I got a letter from my grandmother that I read every single morning, reminding me that I was loved, that I had always been loved, by the person who mattered most. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was mine. 6 months after the party, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Faith, it's Derek. Can we talk? I almost deleted it, almost blocked the number. But something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the knowledge that Derek had been a child when our parents started shaping who he'd become, just like I had. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. He looked different, tired. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen on his face before, uncertainty. I didn't know. His first words. I know you probably don't believe me, but I didn't know the money was yours. Dad said it was from Grandma, from the family. I never asked where it actually came from. You never asked why I didn't get anything either. He flinched. No, I didn't. I just accepted what I was told. We sat in silence for a moment. I'm not asking for money, he said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. For taking what wasn't mine. For never questioning why you were treated differently. He looked down at his coffee. I took out loans. I'm paying my own way now. It sucks, honestly, but it's fair. I studied my half-brother. 24 years old, MBA, almost complete, finally learning what it felt like to struggle. I'm not going to pretend everything's fine, I said. We were raised in the same house, and you got everything while I got nothing. That doesn't just disappear because you're sorry. I know, but... I took a breath. You're not him, Derek. You don't have to be. If you really want things to be different, prove it. Over time. That's the only way this works. He nodded slowly. I can do that. Maybe he could. Maybe he couldn't. But at least he was willing to try. I kept my job. A lot of people thought I was crazy. You're a millionaire now, my friend Sarah said. Why are you still teaching 3rd grade? But that's the thing about money. It can't buy what I loved most about my life. The moment a kid finally sounds out a difficult word, the light in their eyes when a math problem suddenly makes sense, the drawings they make for me that I keep in a folder at home, years and years of stick figures and best teacher hearts. My grandmother understood that. She left me the money because she wanted me to have choices, not because she thought I was making wrong ones. So I stayed. I teach at the same school, the same kids who need someone who believes in them. But now, I do it without the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck. I do it knowing that if I want to take a summer to travel or need time off for my health, I can. I used part of the trust to set up a scholarship fund, the Eleanor Mercer Education Fund. Every year, it helps 3 kids from my school's district afford college. Kids who remind me of who I used to be. Kids whose families tell them they'll never amount to anything. The Vermont house I kept. I go there every summer now, and some weekends when I need to remember what it felt like to be loved unconditionally. I sit on the porch where Grandma taught me to read, and I talk to her sometimes, out loud, just updating her on my life. I put her picture on my desk at home, right next to the letter she left me. She believed in me when no one else did. I carry that with me every single day. I don't talk to my father anymore. After the settlement, he sent exactly one message, through his lawyer, of course. It said I had torn the family apart, and that he hoped I was satisfied with the destruction I'd caused. I didn't respond. Here's what I know about his life now, mostly from Derek. The business survived, but barely. He had to sell the 5-bedroom house and move into a condo. The country club memberships lapsed. The invitations to galas and golf tournaments stopped coming. Nobody wants to be associated with a man who stole from his own daughter. Victoria remarried less than a year after the divorce. Some real estate developer from Connecticut. I hear she's happy. I don't particularly care. And Richard? He's still alive, still working, still, I'm sure, telling himself that he did nothing wrong and his daughter is the villain of this story. I used to want him to apologize, to acknowledge what he'd done, what he'd taken, who he'd tried to make me believe I was. But I've learned something in the last year. Some people, never apologize. They can't. Admitting fault would mean admitting their whole worldview is wrong, and they'd rather burn everything down than do that. So I stopped waiting. I don't wish him ill. I don't wish him well. He's just not part of my story anymore. A character who had his scenes and exited. The energy I used to spend hoping he'd change, I now spend on people who actually deserve it. That's what boundaries are, I've learned. Not walls, not punishment, just a clear line between what's yours and what's someone else's. And finally, knowing which side you're standing on. If you've made it this far, I want to leave you with a few things I've learned. First, the people who love you most will sometimes protect you in ways you can't see. My grandmother spent years preparing for the day when I'd need to know the truth. She didn't tell me while she was alive because she knew I wasn't ready. She trusted me to find my strength, and then she made sure I'd have the tools to use it. If there's someone in your life who believes in you, even when you can't believe in yourself, hold on to that. Even if they're gone, their faith in you lives on. Second, silence isn't always weakness. For years, I thought my inability to stand up to my father meant I was a coward. But sometimes silence is just waiting, gathering strength, collecting evidence, learning the shape of the battlefield before you step onto it. When I finally spoke, I had everything I needed. And my father, who'd mistaken my quiet for submission, never saw it coming. Third, and this is the one I wish someone had told me years ago, you don't owe forgiveness to people who never asked for it. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're not cruel. They're just clarity. This is where I end, and you begin. This is what I will accept, and what I won't. Knowing that isn't betraying your family. It's honoring yourself. My grandmother signed her last letter the same way she signed every letter she ever sent me. All my love, always. For 30 years, I doubted those words. Thought maybe the love came with conditions I'd failed to meet. Now I know better. Her love was never conditional. The only people who made me think it was were the ones who'd stolen from me. That's my story. A key in an envelope. A letter in a vault. A truth that couldn't stay buried. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or made to believe you were less than you are, I want you to know you're not. And you don't have to stay in that story. In the description, there are more stories like this one. People who found their voices. People who stopped accepting less than they deserved. Watch them if you want. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it. I'm Faith Mercer. And I survived my parents.